But he had a major turnaround. After intense personal investigation into legality of the income tax, this person decided to quit the IRS as a matter of principle because he concluded firmly that the income tax is imposed on American people in violation of the U.S. Constitution and the laws that the IRS must follow. And he's taken a courageous step of stepping forward publicly, talking about it. You find his picture and a copy of USA Today ads that the We the People Foundation put out. It's available at the back if you like to see. I'm going to let him come and tell you his unique history about the income tax and where he sees us going from here forward, what to do. Please help me give a warm hand of welcome to Mr. John Turner.
Excuse me, I forgot to turn off my cell phone. I feel it buzzing. I'll be right back. Hello? Commissioner? Oh, thank you for returning my call, Mr. Rosati. How's that? You've been researching, you've been looking for, what's that? You're unable to find, you can't find, you've called on staff attorneys to join you in research. Really? So you're unable to find the law that requires Americans living and working in the 50 states to file an income tax return? Well, as you know, Commissioner, I had the same problem. In fact, after 10 years working as a revenue officer, I had to... What's that? You're resigning too? You have to go? What? It's a woman. Yep. Oh, Bob Schultz is on your other line. Okay. All right. Bye-bye. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for bearing with me on that. It's really rude to, have your cell phone on in a group like this. I just forgot to turn it off. But I decided to take that call. I guess I'm losing track of time, but 15 years ago, something like that, 1987, I took a job as an IRS revenue officer, and I was looking for lots of different jobs. I wasn't looking specifically to be a government employee, nor was I having my heart set on collecting taxes for the federal government. However, I did have a father-in-law. He's deceased now, but he had a 35-year career with the IRS as a revenue officer. And so when I was job hunting back in early 1987, one of the things that I came across that was available among the many places that I submitted resumes was the job of Internal Revenue Service revenue officer. And because I knew what my father-in-law did for a living, I recognized that immediately, what that job was and what it meant. And it wasn't that I was so anxious to collect taxes, but I was looking for a lifestyle change at that time in my life. I had been doing different jobs, and most of the time it seemed like I had no control over my time. Restaurant work and other things where I was always having to be somewhere on holidays and evenings and weekends, and I just didn't like that, and I was looking for something a little more stable. Well, when I came across the government job, first thing I thought of was, well, okay, here's a job that I can meet the criteria in terms of education, and it would be starting out pretty low pay, but there's upward mobility, there's a chance to advance. there would definitely be stable hours, so that appealed to me, and I decided, what the heck, I'm going to apply. And I got an interview, and eventually decided to accept the job when they offered it to me. And I remember thinking right at the moment of decision, when I decided to accept the job, I made myself a couple of promises. I said to myself, this business of taxation, it's a very serious thing. And I thought about some of the history that we know about, the graft and the corruption and anything involving money and seizure of property, all those things. That's a very weighty thing. And I thought about the opportunities just in general where I might possibly be exposed to a certain situation where perhaps my integrity, my character, my ability to be honest might be challenged. And above all, no job or anything is worth losing your integrity. So I made myself a promise. On one hand, I said, if I ever find myself in a situation, whatever that might be, where I can't remain honest, I'll resign the job before I'll submit to anything that I know is not proper, lawful, and something like that, and things along those lines. So the other promise that I made myself at the same time was I started thinking about all the experiences I've had in my life up to that point with government employees. Department of Motor Vehicles, the Postal Service. I'm sure you guys have never met any sourpuss bureaucrats yourselves, right? They're always cheerful, helpful, treat you not like a number but like a human being. Well, I did not want to be that kind of government employee. And I said to myself, if I ever detect, and I say detect because obviously if a person, in terms of evaluating their own selves, if they don't do that, if they're oblivious and they don't check themselves out once in a while in life to see how their attitude is, how they relate to people, then they'd be clueless about a lot of things. It's very unfortunate when you meet people who apparently don't do that very often. But I decided that I was going to do that I wasn't going to hang around for 30 years, collect a pension, if somewhere before that time I had realized that I really hated the job, I didn't like people, all these people were tax cheats, and I was just, wasn't going to like being around them or associated with them. I decided, rather than stay there for a lengthy period of time, when I had discovered that maybe I might have a bad attitude, I would quit. And I didn't really anticipate that, but it's just a promise I made to myself. I didn't want to be one of these people that treated people like numbers. So I was sworn in, along with 49 other revenue officer trainees that completed training in this time of year, 1987, fall, in Sacramento, California. So a group of 50 of us, or at least 50 of us started. I think a few people dropped out before we were done. And I was commissioned. In fact, the district director at that time, he issued to each of us pocket commissions. And they didn't call it that at that time, but that's what it's officially called. It's your identification. It's your badge. And it's your way of identifying yourself to the public when you call on them. So they sent us all and gave us an inventory of cases. Did you know that if you're a delinquent taxpayer, the revenue officer calls you inventory? Yeah, you have a desk drawer full of paper files, and even though they're doing their jobs to a large degree on laptop computers now, as far as storing information, they still cannot avoid having paper case files. So that's your inventory. That's your work. And so they gave me a small inventory, and I was assigned a coach. In that first year, they gave everybody a coach, some senior revenue officer that was a veteran, had years of experience that could answer your questions and hopefully keep you out of jail, keep you out of getting in trouble, doing the wrong thing. And I remember in my very first few weeks on the job, calling on a man in West Sacramento. And the man owed the government not a huge amount of money, but he owed several $100s for each tax period, several years running. And I called on him, and I basically, when he said he couldn't pay, I did what revenue officers do. I said, well, I can't take your word for it. I need to ask you for some financial information to be able to verify your inability to pay. And so I collected this financial information, and I did the evaluation, and there's only 3 or 4 ways that a revenue officer has to dispose of a case. He either collects full pay, or he determines that it's not collectible at this time, or he takes enforcement action trying to collect. He sets people up on a partial payment plan, an installment plan, pay as you go. There's only a few options that the revenue officer has available to him. So when I concluded my evaluation of this gentleman's situation, at that time, in 1987, the Sacramento area had a policy. It wasn't law, it's not a regulation, it was just local policy that people that were going to be qualifying for a payment plan to pay back their delinquent taxes, the government, the IRS was giving them 12 months to do that. If they couldn't fully pay all the taxes, penalty, and interest that they owed within 12 months, we were instructed not to give them a payment plan. Of course, that was kind of a shoot yourself in the foot deal because a lot of people couldn't qualify, and so that left me with the option of trying to levy their bank accounts or their wages. It was not a very smart thing, but that was the policy at that point in time. Well, this gentleman could pay quite a bit of money per month, even though he had told me he couldn't pay. And when I told him that he really didn't qualify with the policy, he had to take 13 months to pay the tax, not 12. So he really didn't qualify according to the policy, but I told him, I thought my boss would approve the payment plan because it was so close to the 12 months and his monthly payments were so significant. Well, my boss, who was trying to, I'm sure, teach this brand new revenue officer trainee how the world turns according to IRS, denied my request for a payment plan for the gentleman. And he said, not only is the answer no, but here's what you are to do. This man has enough equity in his home. The IRS is not the bank. You tell him to go to his bank and get an equity loan and do it within 30 days and pay the government in full. And then if he says no or is unable to do that, you also warn him that we will take enforced collection actions, aka we will seize his personal residence. The government will seize his home if he fails to pay. And I was a brand new trainee. I wasn't prepared to negotiate with my boss at this point. Eventually as you become, the ropes, you might talk with your boss and reason with him and explain why you think your plan is better than his plan. But as a brand new revenue officer, I wasn't equipped to do that, so I said, okay. And I called this gentleman and told him, and what he did was, he said, before he hung up, somebody better watch their back because I'm coming after him. Now, he didn't use my name, he didn't say me, he just left it very vague. Well, here I am, a brand new revenue officer. I don't know how to do very much of my job yet, and I already have to fill out my first assault and threat form. And I couldn't treat that threat lightly. I couldn't say, he didn't mean it, he was just ticked off at me. No, I had to fill out the form and turn it in. And this man, when he got off of his bus route, he was a city bus driver. When he stepped off of his bus a couple of days later, 2 armed agents greeted him and interrogated him. And he confessed, no, he had no intentions of hurting me or anybody else. He just was mad at what I had told him. So you see, a lot of people, perhaps some in this room, and a lot of people I've met have had situations happen to them like that, and it makes them so angry that they start getting out of compliance as far as the IRS goes. They stop filing returns and paying. Not everybody, but a lot of people, that's their kind of response. That kind of grated me. I thought, where's the common sense here? Supposedly that's why they hire revenue officers to use common sense, to use good judgment, and to make tough decisions. People's property, if you're going to take it, you better have your I's dotted and your T's crossed. So that happened early in my career, and I basically applied common sense and was fair with people. People have asked me, well, what would make a guy want to collect taxes for the federal government. I reasoned that the government had bills to pay, that it needed revenue. After all, it's the law of the land. Everybody knows you got to pay your taxes, and that's what we're told, right? And so I thought, well, okay, I'll be part of the solution, not part of the problem. The government needs honest people to work for it. It doesn't need bad apples. And I thought, I'll wear a white hat instead of a black hat. I'll be fair with people. I'll be honest with them and upfront, and they won't have surprises from John Turner. And so I operated that way for nearly 10 years, and I was, to be honest with you, quite happy doing the job. It's not that I enjoyed seizing people's property, but I did that only when all other remedies had been exhausted and they refused to pay or refused to cooperate when they could. Most people, when they're treated nicely and with respect, respond very well. That was my experience. So here I am, 10 years, pretty much minding my business, relatively happy in the job, a job that not very many people admittedly would want to do. And I come home from work one night, and my wife greets me at the front door. And she's got this kind of intent look in her eyes, like gals sometimes do with their husbands. She says, "Hey, did you have a good day? Do you have any plans tonight?" And I, thinking, well, no. She goes, "Good." She grabs my hand and she hauls me off to the dinner table. Dinner is already, it's sitting there steaming, it's ready to eat. And not that she didn't always feed me well, but usually it wasn't ready when I knocked, came through the door. So we sat down and we didn't laugh and joke and talk as much as we normally do. It was a little quiet. And after dinner was over, she took me by the hand and took me over to the sofa. She had this audio tape that she wanted me to listen to, and she popped it in the tape player, the entertainment center, and pushed play, and then sat down next to me, and we basically sat there stoically for 20 minutes with our hands on our knees, staring at this home entertainment center, listening to this man with an accent, ranting and raving about the income tax system, the IRS, our system of money and banking, the Federal Reserve, and on and on and on. And it sounded very radical. So when it was over, my wife looked at me and said, "So what'd you think?" And I said, "Well, it was kind of radical." And she says, "No, what did you think about what he said?" I said, "Oh, gee, she really wants an answer." So I'm facing her on the couch, and I said, "Well, you know what?" I said, "The guy's really radical. He obviously doesn't like the IRS. He doesn't like the income tax. He has problems with it. He doesn't like our fiat money system." But I told her, I didn't hear him say anything illegal or wrong. And she smiled and she says, "Good. My sister and I want you to go to a meeting with us in Grass Valley on Thursday night." And I'm going, oh boy. So I had to meet them at this bank building that was closed. It was in the evening. They rented out a little space. There was probably this size on this side of our room here, and had probably this many people in it at that night. I had no idea what I was getting into. I just was being a good husband and meeting their request for my presence that night. And this man who did the talking that night, he was not the man on the audio tape. He was somebody else who had come over. There was a business angle associated with this somewhere, and that was the draw for the ladies to pull me there and have me evaluate the whole thing and sort out the fact from the fiction and why IRS is involved with this business opportunity. And I was very leery, but I just went. And so I'm sitting on the front row about where this gentleman is, and the man was not up on a podium like this. He was down right at my feet, and he proceeded to spend several minutes telling this audience why the IRS doesn't have authority to do this and to do that, and where's the law? There's no law that requires Americans to file paying tax, blah, 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 blah. Federal Reserve, blah, blah, blah. He's ranting and raving and going on and on. And I'm sitting there, I start slumping down in my chair, and getting tense, steam coming out my ears, twitching in my temples and around that part of my face. I was not very happy with what he was saying. I thought that, I didn't know, but I just thought, this guy looks like a sincere guy. He sounds very sincere. He believes in what he's saying. He's not going to get up here and tell a room full of people all these things and not have some convictions. So I didn't think he was stupid or a dummy or just a liar, but I thought this guy, like a lot of these tax protesters, has taken things out of context. You know, he's taken little snippets of the law, and he's just taken court cases or whatever, and he's strung them all together, and he's made it say what he wants it to say, because he doesn't like paying taxes. That's what was going through my mind as I was listening to him. Well, he asked those who had to leave early because of babysitter commitments and whatever, he said that, you know, they could leave. And he said, if others can stay around, you want to ask questions, get a refreshment and hang around. Let's talk. So when everybody went to get their punch and cookies, I talked with him one-on-one for a few minutes. And my questions, as you might not be surprised, were a little bit intense and pointed and direct. And my responses to his answers. And now my wife and sister-in-law are standing right behind me, listening to this conversation, and they see it going like this. You know, nowhere. She says, you know, she's thinking, you guys are not communicating. Nobody's relating. So she gently pokes me in the rib cage and whispers in my ear, and she says, psst, tell him who you work for and what you do for a living, because he's not, you know, you're not relating to him. He doesn't know where you're coming from. And I'm thinking, yeah, unless I'm calling on them for payment of taxes. That's my policy, you know. But I thought, you know what? My little wife is right. This conversation is going nowhere, and I'm either just might as well walk away from him and wash my hands of it, or try to relate to him. I was a communication major. It's about finding the right words and relating to people. Otherwise, wasting your time. So I told him, and he kind of went, his response was like this. He just barely blinked. He recovered very well from that sudden disclosure on my part of who I worked for and what I did, after all the things that he had said that night. And then something very interesting was about to happen, and I will always commend him for the way that he responded. Instead of arguing with me, instead of pounding his chest and telling me where I was wrong or being contentious at all, he said, you know, he says, have you ever on your own, just personal, you know, not as part of the government agent, but just on your own, have you ever researched for yourself, you know, the law and other things, resources to find out if the things I said tonight are wrong? And then he just shut up. He's a sales guy. And he knows that old sales thing that, you know, the first guy that talks when you're in the closure part of the sales thing loses. And I am not a sales guy, but I know enough about it that I knew where he was going with that. And I felt very uncomfortable, and so I admitted, well, no, I haven't. And he said, I've been talking to you here for a few minutes, and obviously working for the IRS, you clearly have access to the law. You've got to have access to it. Is that true? I mean, isn't there a law library somewhere in the Sacramento office, and don't you have the law in your desk somewhere? And I said, yeah, I do. Then he said, well, I've been talking to you for a few minutes here. You seem reasonably intelligent. To me, he said, I'm guessing that you probably could do some reading and studies and figure out the answers to some of these questions. Is that correct? And he shut up. And I'm thinking, yeah, I think I could. And then he said, and then was his clincher. He said, so I got a question for you. He said, if you're reasonably intelligent and you have access to the law and you just admitted you've never personally verified these things for yourself, and yet you're telling me I'm wrong, he says, do you have an open mind? Do you have the desire to take some time, whatever time you need, and research it out and get back with me? Show me where I'm wrong. Then he shut up. Now the pressure's really on. My wife and sister-in-law back there, a few more people have gathered around there listening. And I'm thinking, God, this sounds like work. I'm just a government employee. Then I thought, but you know what? the guy is right. He's being sincere. He's not badgering me. He's not being contentious. He's asking me reasoned questions, valid questions. Plus, I was so cocky. I was so confident. I said, you got it. And I'm thinking this is going to be a slam dunk. I've been enforcing this law for nearly 10 years, and this turkey, wants an answer, no problem. I'll go research it, and I'll lay it out for him, and that'll be the end of that. Boy, was I naive. So off I went that night with a verbal commitment to him to give him my personal opinion sometime in the near future. I started, I had my copy of the Internal Revenue Code that was issued to me by the IRS, and I got to confess to you, I read it a lot more from that day forward to this date than I ever did for those 10 years working for him. I started looking at, and you know what? I got to tell you something else here. Do we all, generally speaking, not necessarily you or you, but in general in our society, are we good readers nowadays compared to yesteryear? School job's not doing a good job of educating us and helping us read good. I agree. I thought I was a good reader, but we're dumbed down in general. We don't read as well as we should. So here we are looking at Section 1, Tax Imposed, Subtitle A of this thing called the law. And it says right there at the beginning, Section 1, Tax Imposed, big, bold letters. And I go, well, what's this guy's problem? Here it is, man. It says right in the beginning, here's where tax is imposed. Paragraph 8, married individuals filing joint returns and surviving spouses. There is hereby imposed on the taxable income of every married individual, as defined in Section 7703, who makes a single return jointly with his spouse under Section 6013 and blah, 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 blah. And it keeps going. I said, what's this guy's problem? There it is. And I said, wait a minute. Let me read this again. There's hereby imposed on the taxable income of those guys who make a return. I said, wait a minute. That's not exactly the statute that identifies clearly who's liable. It says those who file returns become liable. But okay, well maybe that's not all the answer. So who wants to read a book like this? It's confusing. There's places where it's vague. There's definitions that don't necessarily mean the same thing as what the terms that we use in everyday language. There's all kinds of things about it that, besides the sheer volume of it, how big it is, that make most people not want to pick it up and read it, understandably. So I kept going, and I got to the section there under subtitle F, Procedure Administration, section 6001, that talks about every person liable for any tax imposed by this title or for the collection thereof shall keep such records. And then it goes on and says some other things. And it says, the only records which an employer shall be required to keep under this section. I'm thinking, what does this have to do with an employer? In connection with charge tips shall be charge receipts, records necessary to comply, blah, blah, blah. So that really didn't tell me the exact answer, even though it was flirting with it. They keep flirting with it. It's talking about, liable and imposed and everything, but it really didn't quite say it. Section 6011, general requirement of a return, statement, or list. When required by regulations prescribed by the Secretary, any person made liable for any tax imposed by this title shall make a return or statement. And it goes on to talk about regulations. So I said, well, that sure sounds like it, but the more I read it carefully and properly as you should, I'm not an attorney, but and let me just digress for a second. Back when that gentleman challenged me to do this research, I decided that if I was going to waste my time invest my time doing this on my own instead of playing golf every night, which is what I like to do, I might as well do my best effort to put aside my preconceived notions all my beliefs and all the training the IRS gave me about income tax, tax protester, illegal tax protesters, the whole 9 yards. I thought, okay, I don't know if I can do it, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to be open-minded and objective. So I'm trying to look at this not through a real narrow lens, but I'm trying to look at it in terms of this guy, what he said, and why he wanted me to take some time to show him wrong. So you flip over the page 6012 of the code, persons required to make returns of income. Aha! You know, so you read that. Every individual having for the taxable year gross income which equals or exceeds the exemption amount, except that a return shall not be required of an individual. And it goes on, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I just thought, oh, this is it. But there were some more things that I needed to do. And I'm not going to go on and on here and bore you with all those details, and some of you have probably made the same study for yourselves to come to your own conclusions. But by the time you get through the definitions of certain terms and go back to these places in the code, you start having some problems. It starts breaking down. And that's what happened to me. In fact, you heard of this thing called cognitive dissonance? Well, several weeks into this, things were not meeting. And it seemed like every time I picked up a rock and looked under it for some good information, it was wormy and nasty and cold and muddy. And I thought, you know, I just got to keep turning over rocks and I'll find the answer. And instead, I just kept getting the wrong answers for what I expected to have happen. Well, I started having some internal, kind of like a bellyache, you know. I started feeling really bad. I thought, why is this not so clear as crystal clear? And more studies and now visits to the law library, eventually visits with people in the so-called tax movement who were, you know, vocal and outspoken about their position that people are mostly not required to file income tax returns. And I found them to be very accessible. I was kind of surprised about that. I was still working for IRS. I whipped out my commission. I said, look, I'm not pulling your leg. I really work for these guys, but I want to know. I'm not here. They didn't send me. I'm here on my own volition. I'd like to know. I'd sit down. They'd spend 2 hours of their own time. I'd take notes. They'd give me some of their materials, and they'd speak at seminars or whatnot. After 2 hours, and they'd, you know, have to leave or something, they'd say, well, you know, good luck, and I'd walk out like this, you know, with all kinds of homework. And I kept thinking, well, okay, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Instead of finding the law, I couldn't find the law. I found lots of sections of the law that looked like it was the one that I needed, but I never could find the correct one that made it clear. And at some point in time, like the end of March 1997, because I started this in the beginning of 97, I was unable to, in good conscience, go out and file notices of levy, send out notices of levy to people's employers, their bank accounts, call tow truck drivers and have them seize people's automobiles right out of their driveway, or worse yet, while they're at work and they come out and their car's gone, they don't even know what happened, just an empty parking space there. I did those things, like I said earlier, with a good conscience based on what I knew and believed before I came across this information. When all of a sudden I realized that I didn't have the proper authority to do this, I had some serious problems internally going on with me. You know, my mind was shaken. I couldn't believe that the government would create such a fantastic hoax and make it look so tight and so required. And then for all these 80 years, they put people in jail and they take their property. Clearly, they have the authority to do this. All these attorneys in our land and all these CPAs and all these people wouldn't let this happen if it wasn't clearly authorized and proper. And so here I was, all of a sudden, with the inability to rectify this, and the only answer I had for myself was to resign. I did not make a big fanfare. I did not even tell my employer the reasons why I resigned. Part of that was twofold. My father-in-law, 35-year career with them, had a good relationship with people still working in that job. He was my best friend. We lived on the same property. I didn't want to embarrass him by any large public disclosure. Number two, I knew enough from my studies at that time to know that I didn't belong there continuing to collect taxes, but I wasn't prepared at that time to sit down with him, my best friend, and a 35-year career with IRS, doing the same job as I did as a revenue officer, and talk with him about this. I wanted to continue studying and get a little more sharp, have my convictions be stronger and deeper and more focused, and then talk to him about this, because he was a smart man. However, a few months later, after I resigned, he unexpectedly passed away. And you know, I don't know if that was just meant to be, that I wasn't going to have this conversation with him, but I never did get to have that conversation with him. So I resigned. I was quiet in my departure to the IRS. I asked in writing for my pocket commission to be returned to me. I wanted it as a memento. I didn't know what I know now about the fact, you know, the rules, and I found out later that their rules are the only time a person will get their credentials back is when they've retired and when they've made the request in writing. Well, I did not retire. I resigned. I wasn't eligible for retirement, and but I did make the request in writing. So, but lo and behold, the thing came in an envelope with a piece of white paper wrapped around it and a rubber band around it into my mailbox shortly after I resigned. And I was surprised, but delighted. And I just tucked it away for safekeeping. It had it's been perforated on the top and the bottom with holes that says retired on both the top half and the section and the bottom half, which is what they're supposed to do. And if you look on the IRS website today, which is there because of the Tax Act in 1998 that was passed, one of the things they wanted to do was be more open and have information more accessible to the public. So I discovered here a while back that there's two types of commissions. There's an enforcement commission and there's a non-enforcement commission. And it describes all this information. And my commission was fitting the description of what they call a non-enforcement commission. It has a little red A at the end of the serial number. And you read this on the website and I'm going, holy smokes. They trained me at the beginning and told me I was an enforcement officer. They proved that I was an enforcement officer because I was told every time I confronted a taxpayer and had the little conversation with them, I was required, standard procedure, to say, I need you to do this, this, and this. I need you to do it by this date. I also need to warn you that the government will take collection actions, will take enforcement actions against your property if you fail to give me this information by this date or file these returns. We're required to tell people that. And so here I am thinking, wait a minute, I've got a non-enforcement commission, and every other revenue officer, the collectors, and every other revenue agent, the auditors, has the same kind. You can verify this for yourself. And I'm thinking, this is kind of amazing. I thought this through for quite some time to try to make sense of it, and I concluded, now the enforcement officers that have the enforcement commission, that's your special agents. That's your CID agents who carry guns and handcuffs, and although they do seizures once in a while, it's not for payment of back taxes. It's for under the property forfeiture laws of the land when they've observed a certain piece of property being used in the commission of a crime. But they don't seize property to pay your taxes. I did that as a revenue officer. Yet I'm the one with the non-enforcement commission. What's up with that? You know, there's a lot to it, but to distill it down to something here for you, a summary, what it means is the government knows that revenue officers cannot use force to take your property. It's purely administrative. That's what the A stands for on the non-enforcement pocket commission. And they know very well that you cannot use any kind of force. It's all done by intimidation and the fear factor. I'm writing a book, and I tentatively have it entitled IRS 90% Bluff, because I'm wanting to communicate to the American people just specifically how, where does the bluff come in? How do they make this happen? How does it look, on the one hand, so required, so mandatory, people going to jail, people losing their businesses, and yet here's this turkey, this former IRS agent saying it's largely bluff. I intend to explain that in detail to the best of my ability. My website is not open yet, but I'm just so slow in getting it open, but I've been telling people for months, to look for it. I'm probably a few days away from having it available, at least, something there as I continue to build on it. It's www.showmethelaw.com. Showmethelaw.com. I think that's kind of appropriate. I was really lucky when I found out that domain name was available, and so I grabbed it. But I intend to show on that website and to illustrate in my book that, among other things, some specific things, including, I only have a few minutes here on the podium, so I can't tarry with you very long on the subject, but one of the things I noticed is, in my research, is that there's a section of the code called 6020B. And that's the section that basically says if any person fails to file any return, the secretary shall make the return. And that's very broadly written language, isn't it? That pretty much says anybody, doesn't it? And when I'm such a pack rat. And I saved, and I don't know why, other than maybe it was providential, but I saved a lot of things after I left IRS for some strange reason, including my old original training materials. Things that they gave me as classroom handouts to teach me how to do the job in 1987. And there was a lesson on section 6020B of the law. And it says very clearly that this lesson and that law applies to employment tax returns, partnership returns, and excise tax returns. It makes no mention of income tax returns. And
Can you say those again?
partnership returns, excise returns, and employment returns. And this lesson showed a little snippet, a photocopy of the law, 6020B. It showed a copy of the delegation order, number 182, to demonstrate. They wanted us to know clearly, because they put it in there, order number 182, that revenue officers, among others, have the delegated authority to use procedures under 6020B to prepare these kinds of returns. And then they even said, generally you can file the following returns using the authority granted under 6020B. And they list 8 returns: Form 940, 941, 942, 943, 720, 2290, CT-1, 1065. Where's 1040? Well, they already told us it didn't apply. That wasn't part of this lesson. I was very shocked to years later, when I was doing my research, to come across this little snippet in this lesson on 6020B. Listen to this. The IRM, now the IRM is the Internal Revenue Manual. That's not the law, it's not the regulations, it's just guidelines, procedural guidelines for employees in how to do their job. The IRM restricts the broad delegation shown, and it points to this copy of the delegation order that they gave us, for revenue officers to employment, excise, and partnership tax returns. Are you ready for this? Because of constitutional issues. Because of constitutional issues. Why we didn't question that, all of us in that training classroom at that time, I don't know. Except that we, in terms of our attitudes and our motivations, we weren't questioning whether this was legal or proper or any of those things. We just were learning how to do the job. And then it says in parentheses, you have already studied audit referrals as a means to enforce. Look at that word, enforce. And they gave me a non-enforcement pocket commission. You have already studied the lesson on audit referrals as a means to enforce compliance on income tax returns. And there's another lesson, a separate one from this one, that is that lesson. And it makes no mention of the statute, no mention of any delegation orders, no mention of any requirement. It says this is what you do with those those Form 1040 wascally wabbit non-filers. This is what you do. You fill out a referral. It's a report. You talk to him. You ask for the return. He has W-2 income, 1099 income. You got information from a bank summons. You compute the tax and you send it off. It's a report. It says he didn't file, he didn't pay, we should do something about it. Now my time's up, but I don't have time to go into it, but there's a huge body of knowledge to explain just how they are able to pull this off and get away with it. And folks, the bottom line is, if people knew what I know what I'm telling people about with regard to this substitute return business, this misapplication of Code Section 6020B. If they knew what I know, how the government pulls this off, they would stop filing their returns because they would realize what a fraud it is, how the government, how IRS is limited in their ability. Folks, I'm telling you, the government has no legal mechanism in place, never has had, to get a tax assessment by preparing a tax return for you, an income tax return, when you don't. And I'm going to explain that in great detail on the website. And so I appreciate your attention. I hope you get a lot out of this weekend, and I wish all of you very, very much the best. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wasn't John great?
Yeah.
Yes, give him another hand. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back from a short break, only 10 minutes, we're going to share with you why the IRS is the Wizard of Oz. Okay, think about that. When you come back from a break, you think IRS is this powerful entity, they do all that, you're going to find out what a Wizard of Oz paper tiger it is. So be back in your seats, please, folks. No talking at the tables at 11:25. Let's get started, okay?